Welcome to Africa Event Connect, the podcast where we go beyond the brief into the thinking and the strategy and the people shaping the future of business events across Africa. I'm your host, Projeni Pather, and my guest today has built an entire career around a deceptively simple idea: that events, at their best, aren't logistic experiences. They're human experiences. Now, Tamlynne Wilton-Gurney is an entrepreneur, CEO, and Chief Ideas Officer at IDNA Africa, a company she founded at the intersection of psychology, experience design, and meaningful connection. Now, she's worked with associations, brands, and organizations across the continent, helping them build not just better events, but better experiences, ones that move people long after the last session wraps. Tamlynne, I'm genuinely delighted to have you here today. Welcome to Africa Event Connect.
Thanks for having me. It's been a long time coming.
It's been a long time for sure. So I'm thrilled for you to share your journey with us. So let's just start with IDNA Africa. Take us on the journey of founding it.
So I've worked for many other event organizations over the past 25 years. And I think what really struck me working there is that they kind of think that events are about logistics. Mm-hmm. And my view is that it's more of neuroscience with a seating plan. And I saw the gaps, and the people that I worked with and worked for didn't understand my approach. And eventually, I think I took the plunge and decided it was time to kind of do my own thing, choose my own clients, ones that drink the crazy Kool-Aid and ones who kind of understand what it is that I'm trying to build and I'm trying to do. And so, IDNA was born.
Wow. So you've genuinely felt that there was a gap that needed to be filled in what you were doing, because you've been in this industry for a long time.
Absolutely. I think running conferences like the South African AIDS Conference or the TB Conference, those are medical conferences, or the Toilet Association Conference. I know it's crazy how many associations exist, even around things like toilets. But the real thing for me is that they all ran the same. They had the same presentations, the same boring MCs, words and words and words on screen, and I felt bored. And I thought to myself, yes, I'm ADHD, but if I'm bored, everybody else is bored. It takes a lot to keep my attention. But I looked at people and realized they were just sitting there to get CPD points. They weren't there because they wanted to be there. They weren't there because they were being moved or because something was happening to them. And I realized in that moment, we could do more. Mm-hmm. You know, if you think about associations or even just organizations in general, they shouldn't ever have an event just for the sake of having an event. There's a purpose behind it. They're either trying to scare someone into doing better or changing their life, trying to motivate someone to doing better or change behavior, or they're using it as a reward. And then they make you sit in 8 hours a day of boring content. And that for me is punishment.
So at what point in time did you realize that psychology sits at the center of your work?
It's interesting. I worked running the SA AIDS conference for a while, and just knowing something was missing, and I had a keen interest in psychology, and I think it wasn't around events. The reason I really liked the idea of psychology is because I think I wanted to understand myself better. Being an ADHD person, coming from a broken family, I think psychology kind of appealed to me, just trying to understand myself better. Mm-hmm. And so I went to study psychology at night at WITS. I went to class for 6 years. While running a company. And I think in that moment, finally, when I did the neuroscience subjects, I realized that was it. It clicked for me. It wasn't just about me trying to understand myself as an ADHD human being. Once I understood myself, I realized that I could take that and apply it to other humans. And so it became bigger for me, looking at subjects like sociology, culture, identity. All of those things play a huge role in how we put an event together. Understanding how attention works, how you keep someone's attention. And so, studying psychology, throwing myself into it and trying to understand myself led me to wanting to understand others better and helped me do my job better. And then when I launched IDNA, I got my degree just before that. And so I realized at that point, this is how I'm going to make a difference.
Absolutely. And I think there's so few people I believe. I've seen it. I've also been in the industry for a very long time. And so few of us talk about or understand the psychology of the stakeholders that are involved in the event. What is going on in their minds? What are their experiences shaping their current experience, their opinions, their perspective on what we're presenting, and how do we use it to bring it all together? But you're so right, we're dealing with people. And the heart of people is their psychology, right? What makes them up? So I'm really enjoying this, and I'm hoping that all our guests will be equally excited about how we can tap into this for all of us that are involved in this event industry. It's a different perspective, and I think it's always about building on our experiences and building on the events with new perspective. So let's talk about experience design, right? I mean, it's still relatively a new lens in the African events industry. Not many people understand it fully. So when you started, did people understand what you were building? I mean, or did you have to educate the market before you could serve it? I mean, I'm sure, clients come to us and they go, we need to run a conference, and these are the guests, and this is the budget, and this is when we want to have it. So how did you go about trying to educate them?
That was the fun part, I must be honest. People think I'm crazy, and they still do. They'll come to me and say, I want to have a conference. There's 500 people, this is the venue. And then I'm like, no, you're missing the brief. What is the event about? Then they'll tell me, oh, this is what our association is about. I'm like, no. Rewind. What do you want to achieve? No, we want to grow our membership. No. Go back. So it takes a while to try and get people to really understand what they're wanting to achieve, firstly. What does your association stand for? So we work with South African Principals Association, and it's one of my favorites because it's about public education. And if you think about it, it's got a higher purpose. We all want our public education system to work.
Yes.
There's an emotive layer here.
Absolutely.
Right? How do we make South Africa work? How do we drive our country forward? So that emotion is generally missing when you get a brief from someone.
Yeah.
And unless you've got that emotion, you're not able to craft an impactful experience. And so people think I'm mad, generally, 90%. But the 10% is where the magic happens. When the clients listen to me and they're like, Tam, I love what you're saying. Let's make it real. Let's make it matter. And to be honest, those are the clients we really want to work with. When clients don't understand the emotiveness of it, don't understand the psychology, I generally can't help them because it means I can't do my best work and the team can't do their best work. So we're quite choosy in terms of which events we want to get involved with. It has to have a bigger layer. It has to have a bigger purpose. And then we can start to help curate it. Because when you look at the neuroscience of event design, or just look at people in general, we're all ego-driven. Everyone is looking at an experience saying, what can I get from this for myself? When you listen to a speaker, you're saying to yourself, how does this help me? How does this make me better? Everything is ego-driven. So unless you design the event based on human ego, it's not going to work. So there's ego, and then there's your greater purpose and your greater good. And there's something about the greater good that helps to make your ego feel better, because it feels like you're driving something forward, something bigger than yourself. And that also drives the ego. And then you've got to look at how you tell that story. So to answer your question, people still think I'm crazy. Clients still don't get it. But some do, and those are the magical ones. Those are the ones we love to work with. Those are the ones that you can shift and shape. But yes, people think I'm nuts. And I'm sure
that those experiences where you have convinced the client is bought into your vision, and it becomes client's vision as well, understanding why we need to tap into the psychology of our audience, those events probably do even better the next year, right?
They do. They get higher number attendance, they get higher sponsors, they get better attendance in general, better engagement.
Yes.
Because people come to an event and they'll sit there for 8 hours if it's a 1-day or a 2-day event. But at the end of it, they go, okay, I got my CPD points. It doesn't mean much, That kind of, they have to do it. So it's almost like a grudge purchase in my mind. The thing is, if they sit at that event and they've really engaged and they walk away feeling emotional, they're going to come back. They're going to tell someone about it. And the thing is, for me, if they could have made just one contact at that event, something that means something to them, or they've heard someone's story that has impacted them, they're going to come back next year. And an engaged audience is so much better than just having an audience. And a lot of people don't understand that. They just look at the numbers. Oh, we had 100 delegates, we had 10,000 delegates. But did you have 10,000 engaged delegates? You know, or did they just sit there to get their CPD points and then leave?
Yeah.
And they don't get it.
So how much did the content resonate with them this year versus last, instead of saying, we're up 10% on numbers from this year to last year?
Exactly. And the other thing is telling a story, right? So people sit, and a lot of organisers look at the content and they don't look at the story in between, the thread. And so it feels disjointed, you know. But if you look at the brain is looking for surprise and it's looking for difference. People just sit. I mean, I've watched my son's ridiculous Cocomelon, and think at some point you switch off because you know what's coming. And I think, you know, if there was almost like something that happened in the middle of Cocomelon that was, I don't know, something completely unexpected, my attention then would settle and I'd feel like I got something from it.
Yes.
But because I know what to expect, and your brain's gotten into sit, watch, snore.
Yes.
That's
work on my laptop.
Work on my laptop, and you're just there. You're not actually taking anything in.
Yes. So you need those triggers through the day.
Absolutely.
To stimulate them. Right. Now, the word experience obviously gets used a lot in our industry. It's starting to build momentum. But is the industry actually designing experiences, or are we just calling live events experiences and hoping that's enough now?
It's interesting because experience can be good or bad. So I think they're all experiences. It's just whether they're a good experience or a bad experience. There was actually a study done by a guy called Antonio Damasio many, many years ago. And what he did was they looked at the parts of the brain that were involved in decision making. And they realized that if there was no emotion involved, they couldn't make a decision. So it's fascinating, right? But link that to the next thing I'm going to tell you. They then, a different scientist, looked at the brain and while it looked at design. So packaging. Packaging is a great thing to think about. So really bad design and really good design. And what they realized was that the brain stimulated the fight or flight response when it was looking at design it didn't like. And when it was looking at design that it did like, it stimulated the pleasure center, the same part of the brain associated with orgasm.
Wow.
So what that means is your brain responds to bad and good experience design, or design in general, just experiences it differently. Now, the thing is, a lot of organisers are probably creating experiences, but are they stimulating the fight or flight response or the pleasure center?
That is so true. So how do we figure that out? Is there a test that we do beforehand? Should we test the material that we put forward?
The way that we do it, so we play a game around our content, around the creative, and we start with, what does this event look like? So I don't know how many event websites I've gone onto, and they're awful. They don't tell a story. It's just a plonk of a logo and 10 CPD points per day or some random thing like that. But the colors clash. That already doesn't make me feel like I want to attend this conference.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. So it's, how do we design the creative, the story? How do you tell a story from start to finish? So we spend a lot of time curating that to begin with. What do the touch points look like? We map all the touch points and we call it an experience design or experience architecture process. So we run through that. Then we look at, how are we telling the story on the stage? Because what you're trying to do is have this golden thread.
Yes.
Because humans respond to stories. They respond to stories. We've been responding to stories since way back when we were sitting around a fire listening to stories of Africa and how the zebra got his stripes and all of those things. We love stories. We're story-driven humans, right? So the thing is, everything needs to speak to one another. You've got to tell a story, because when someone's sitting in that audience, they will be able to tell that something's been disjointed or something doesn't feel like it threads. And so we spend about 2 weeks just doing the event architecture components of the experience, mapping it, testing it, checking it, showing it to a test audience from a creative perspective, and looking at if we look at how we want people to respond. If we want people to feel fear, there's some campaigns you want people to feel fear. For example, there was this amazing Don't Drink and Drive advert. Okay, I'll use an example. It's an amazing campaign. And what they did was they realized that just telling someone, don't drink and drive, didn't work. What they did was they flipped the kind of script, and they put the kind of pressure on the person taking the call. And they had this visual of a phone with blood out of it saying, don't take the call if someone's driving.
Wow.
So that for me is so impactful. And that visual, and see the emotive and the psychology around it. It's emotive right then and there.
Right there and there. The fear that it stimulates.
Exactly.
Yes.
And it's because the brain is visual. And if you look at the brain that we try and stimulate, it's called the old brain or the reptilian brain. And a lot of people try to stimulate the prefrontal cortex. We don't care about the prefrontal cortex. Well, we don't. That's your executive, your CEO of your brain. That's the brain that developed later, as they say. Your reptilian brain is the old brain. It's the one that helped you survive. It's the one that's helped us survive for millions of centuries. And what that is, it's very visual. So that's why when you see a stick on the floor and you're in the bush, you jump, you think it's a snake.
Right.
Because it responds before your CEO can tell you, don't be a moron, that's not a snake. Like, you're good.
Yeah.
And so visual stimuli is so important. And that's why we have to be so careful what visuals we stimulate, what visuals we're feeding people. So we spend the longest on visual. And how do we program the event from a visual storytelling perspective?
Now, that is so interesting you say that, because immediately I start thinking about the number of different conferences and events, whether that I've attended or I've helped to create. And very often it is not seen hand in hand. The program is seen as the program, and the design is the design. And that's our logo, that's our CI, and that is the identity we'll carry forward, irrespective of what the conference story is all about. And now you're saying we need to work together and bring that together so that the event needs to have its own identity outside your corporate identity, right?
Absolutely. It does. And what we'll do is we will work with an association or an organization with the leadership, the board, to understand what is the strategic objective for the next year. And we create a narrative that helps to kind of guide and create a look and feel and a kind of identity, personality for that conference or for that event. And it's separate from the CI. You can use the CI to kind of influence it, but it needs to have a different narrative. It's not your organization. It is a part of your organization. It's supposed to help you drive your objectives. It is not your organization.
Right.
And I think it's important to understand that.
And then again, when we start seeing it on the floor, the design elements coming through, it's in the signage, it's the directional signage, it's the branding on the stage, it's your registration, it's your table decor, it's all of that. All of that needs to be corresponding with the story that we're telling. That's
Absolutely.
what we're saying.
And signage is not just signage either. So the thing is, if you look at what people, again, speaking back to what our reptilian brain wants, it's ego-driven. It's all about me. So, if you've got signage, you could, for example, have QR codes there that have all the different delegates flashing through, and you can scan a QR code to have someone's LinkedIn profile. Because there's different things that you can think of that help to drive and help to kind of feed that ego.
Right.
But signage is never signage. Registration should never just be registration. A stage should never be a stage. When we did the Lego conference, the Lego Africa Play conference, we built the entire stage from Lego. We had giant snakes and ladders that people could play with. So it's about how do you bring that personality into the event? How do you tell a story at that event? And how do you make the normal touch points a little different? Because everyone's expecting it. Remember what I said about when you know what to expect, it all looks the same. If you're doing it differently, people start to take notice. And the other thing is you have to help make people feel safe. Not everyone comes to an event feeling like they're going to go and talk to everybody, but they really want to. The thing is you have to create a safe space for people. They have to come to your event and say, okay, this is not too different, but different enough that it makes me pay attention. 2, do I feel safe and secure in the space? And 3, am I going to learn something? Is it going to help me? Is it going to feed my ego? So I'm constantly scanning the room. Anybody is. How does this serve me? What am I getting from this? How does it help me? And so you got to help give those things to them. So we constantly ask ourselves during the event process or the event design process, how are we feeding the ego? How are we making it about them? Not about you as the organization. How do you flip it and make it about the delegate?
That is very interesting. So you're saying we need to intentionally design all these emotional arcs into the program.
Absolutely.
Into the conference. And so give us a few examples. I know you mentioned Lego for one, right?
Yeah, Legos for one. We work with the Green Building Council. That's a really good one. But if you think about their story, it's climate change. Again, a greater purpose, right? So we 1 year built the entire stage from recycled, or not even recycled, from actual trash. My team were at the rubbish dump collecting trash, and we washed it. I'm not that bad a person. I mean, we did wash it. But the point was, we asked the delegates throughout the event, whatever they used, to then contribute to the stage, so that by the end, we could actually see how much stuff we were using. And that, again, was quite an emotive thing that people were doing. You know, so little things like that. The other thing is, in terms of content, you know, I'll use an example of last year's Green Building Convention. You'd think that you would just be listening to architects. For me, if you think about buildings, it's not just about the building, it's about the humans that live in between. So we had a speaker who actually was a child soldier who walked here from Angola. And he lived on the streets for many years. And we wanted the architects and we wanted the government and, you know, urban designers and kind of property developers to understand the people that are living on the streets in between the buildings that they design. What is that? What is that? And so we wanted that emotive story. So I think it's really important. It's not just about the event you put on. It's about the story you tell. It's about the movement. It's about making people feel moved. If I don't get tears at an event, I've done something wrong. If I don't get goosebumps, I've failed.
Because ultimately, it's the why we're going back to, right? Why do we want the tears? You know,
Yes.
Why do we want to stimulate the emotion? So what do we want them to walk away with? What change do we want them to make when they leave that conference, so that the content can have the impact that it desires? And that goes back to sitting down with client and understanding that what change do you want these people to make when they leave here? Because that affects your entire industry.
Exactly. And I think it's also got something to do with active citizenry. If we look at the role of an association, and I always say this to people and they think I'm nuts again, you know, it's so difficult to find people who believe the same thing. But once you do, and all the fish are swimming in the same direction, it's amazing what you can accomplish. So associations are great because you've got people who already are believing in the same thing, kind of, but they're all swimming in the same direction. Mostly. And they want to achieve the same thing for their industry. They're already there. They've already drank the Kool-Aid. So you're able to just accomplish so much more and help to drive South Africa forward, or Africa for that matter. You know, education, sustainability, health. There's so much you can do.
Absolutely.
And I think, you know, there's an element of we want to drive our own objectives, but there's an element of active citizenry. How do we drive our continent forward? How do we make us better? How do we compete? And by doing that, by making everyone feel something and understand they're part of something bigger, that's what you're able to achieve.
And we see it so often that people are complacent. People are willing to complain. They're willing to shout out and get upset about things, but they stay inactive. They're not prepared to do something about it. I chatted recently with another guest, Martin van Ester from the Netherlands, and he talks about the perfect strangers. And it brings to mind what you're saying now. We're bringing together 500 perfect strangers in the same room, but they have the same vision. They have common interests. And it's such an injustice as event organizers if we don't orchestrate this interaction to make them active participants, to engage them, to, you know, get them emotionally involved and help them move the world forward, right? So I think that comes together so well for me here. We have, it's not just, organizing the cleaning and the food and the venue. It goes far beyond the involvement that we need to have as organizers, right?
Absolutely.
And that's where that excitement and passion comes in you. I can see that. Because you know that you're involved in such a deeper level, and every conference that you do has such an impact. Wow. Now, let's talk about association brands, right? And meaningful conferences. Now, you've worked with many associations. to elevate their brands and their conference experiences. What does it take to build an association brand that has genuine meaning, not just a logo and a tagline?
I think, and we've done a lot of strategies for associations. We don't just do the conference. We start with the strategy, and I like to get involved there already, because what I realized is when we took on association clients just for their conference, they hadn't done the work to help us to do the conference well. So we start at the strategy level. We look at the association strategy, their member benefits, who they stand for, what they stand for, their values, and we help them articulate those there already, because that does the work for us. Because many associations we find have a logo, they have a membership benefits, which are wrong. I mean, a lot of membership benefits are just features of the association. They're not actually benefits. So we help them to articulate those first and what they stand for.
Right.
And we do the same, if you look at any of the businesses I'm involved in, it's about understanding the values and what you stand for and what are you driving. Associations need to do the same thing. So we start there with them. So that's the first point. It's very rare we come across an association that's done that work already. Okay, so we start there, we understand who they are, we help them articulate their member benefits, we help them to articulate their vision, their mission, and who do they stand for and what do they stand for? And what does their look and feel? And is their look and feel emotive? Are they speaking to their target audience? How are they drawing in younger members? A lot of associations love to use you've got access to research papers, and I think that's the most ridiculous benefit ever, because in the day of AI and ChatGPT and Google even, I can get all that content, and youngsters do. So how are you making sure that you're relevant enough to bring youngsters in? And if you look at who they are, they want to make a difference. The younger generation wants to feel like they've made a difference. And so if your association isn't already there at the kind of grassroots level, everything else is going to fall flat. So we start there. Then we look at, what story do you want to tell at your conference? What is your objective for the following year? What are the trends happening in your industry? What are the pain points of your potential exhibitors and sponsors? How do we craft it for them? Doing research, asking your audience, what would they like to hear at the conference? A lot of associations curate a conference and throw it at their audience. They've never asked their audience what they want. We did another conference which was really interesting, where we didn't have a program. We let the program come to life at the conference.
Wow, so that's brave.
It was. I have a lot of grey hair, but it worked so beautifully because we let the audience decide what they were going to hear and what they were going to ask, and the speakers had to be on their game.
That is very inspiring. Very inspiring. I'm sure the association were sitting at the edge of their seats.
They were. They trusted me though, so
it was great.
Good. It was good, yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose it's about, again, as an organizer, about having that a relationship of trust, building that up with your clients, and then they'll allow you to do these amazing things.
Crazy things, yes.
Crazy for sure. So, that is really exciting, because to understand that you're not getting involved just at that point where the association comes through and says, we need to organize an event. You're working with them long before that. You're getting involved into their culture. You're helping them to realign their strategy. And the conference is not just a tick box, on a standalone, isolated event. It forms part of that bigger strategy. And that's what you getting them to realize, right?
Yep.
And you have great success, I'm assuming.
I'm here, I'm alive.
And they're still your clients.
No one's tried to kill me yet, and I still have clients, yes.
Okay, so let's go through all those touch points. We talked briefly about it earlier, but the storytelling, the human-centered design. We spoke about signage for a little bit, but it goes beyond. You said registration, your directional signage, all needs to tell the story, and then there's the program design and even the menu cards, right? Yeah. What do you think are the most overlooked touch points that actually make the most significant difference to how an attendee feels?
The first thing is registration. It's their first kind of on-site experience of the event. And I think everyone's so used to getting a registration card with their name and maybe a QR code so they can kind of connect. But I think there's so many other things. Once we let delegates design their own name tag. So they got a blank card, and we asked them to tell a story about themselves on their name tag.
Okay.
So it became kind of like a networking opportunity as well. So registration is overlooked. So that's the first thing. You're kind of expecting to see shell scheme if you're lucky, maybe table if they're budget tight, with some tablecloths, and you get a tag. Boom. So completely overlooked. The other thing is the design of the main room.
Just pause there. Going back to registration. I totally agree there. I mean, now that you're making me think about it, I mean, you realize this because you do it all the time, but it's your starting point when your first interaction, and that dictates what the rest of the day is going to be like. Right.
100%. And even before that, we love to send a teaser emailer on the morning. And it's not just, hey, see you there. We normally send them things to consider, points, to ask themselves, networking questions. We send them almost something to help them to reflect on how they're going to show up that day.
Right.
Something a little deeper. Then, as I mentioned, the registration, and then they go straight into a main room. Generally, you start with a plenary of some sort, and that's where most conferences fall flat. It's rows and rows of little chairs all sitting together, looking at a stage. And that for me is an epic fail, because what you're doing there is you're creating boundaries. You're saying to people, I want you to come to our event and network and meet someone. But then you're putting everyone in these very uncomfortable little chairs. And what you're saying is, this is my space, that's your space. You're not actually creating an environment for networking. We love to, again, flip it. And we'll have couches with their back towards the stage. Because it's not about what's on the stage, it's about the people sitting in front of you. So we love to have soft lighting, carpets, scatter cushions. They must feel like they're in their lounge at home.
Right. Comfort.
And networking, because the thing is, sitting on those horrendous conference chairs with a very loud, generally, carpet underneath you, it doesn't make you feel like this is a place you're going to feel safe. Remember, I mentioned that fight or flight stuff.
Yes.
So now I'm feeling like, okay, you've now given me my space. You're telling me this is my space. This tiny little chair with the two little arms, if you're lucky, to rest on. Otherwise, your hands are on your lap. How's that going to encourage me to talk to the person next to me?
No, completely isolated. You don't want to. You're too scared to look over. That is so true. And yet we've been so accustomed, and it's almost, we've been trained for years to go and sit row by row, and that's the expectation. And we walk out with not much. The only engagement we're having is here with the presenter on stage. But that is not the central focus of the entire conference.
So when you flip it and you make it about the ego, again, it changes. So when you are doing your event design and you ask yourself, how do we make this about the delegate, not about the speaker, not about us? It'll change the way you design the event.
Right. Now, again, like you're saying, you're a strong advocate for story-driven design, right? So let's bring the story back into that. So how can events become stories that people live instead of programs they simply attend, right? So that's a challenge for sure.
Absolutely. It is. It's the most fun part. But I don't know if you've ever listened to someone speak. You kind of hear the beginning and you hear maybe the middle and you hear the end, because our brains are primed for stories. So I think what you have to do is create these little moments throughout the event that feel like part of the story. But you also have to remember, again, going back to the ego, everyone's writing their own story at the event. So if you allow for each person to make one meaningful connection at the event, you're already helping them write their story. If you are focusing, again, catering is a huge thing. When someone doesn't listen to your dietary requirements, you're stimulating the fight or flight again, you're making them feel unsafe. So every single person is already writing their own story. So yes, there has to be an overarching story around the brand, what you're trying to do, a theme of some sort. And I'll talk about an example just now. But if you're forgetting about what someone eats, they're writing their own story internally. They're saying, I'm not important enough. I wasn't important enough for you. And so you have to, yes, write your own story for the event, but you have to be careful of the story that each individual is telling themselves and what they're writing for themselves at your event. And so that's really important as well. We did an event long ago, and the theme was Dare to Lead. And so it was around climate change. And we then had a dare board. And we had all these days you could pick up, and it was, we dare you not to shower for 2 days. But then we explained how much water you're actually using. So we tell those stories throughout, and we had these days, and each exhibitor had to have different days at their stand. So that's the outward story. But the story that each person's telling themselves, you have a little bit of control over, but you have to try and create touch points for them to write their own story at the event. So there's 2 stories you have to worry about, the brand story and the individual story. And they all have their own story. And I think this also kind of speaks to what happens at the end of an event. You sit for 2 days. If that last session falls flat, that experience has failed. Your event can be as amazing as you want it to be, but if that last speaker is a sponsor talking about their brand, that is the worst thing you could possibly do. You want someone on that stage that's going to make people, you almost want that peak, that emotional peak where people get excited or maybe they get sad, but you need, that emotion has to be there in the last session. Otherwise, the end of the story, everyone looks forward to the end of the story. So when you're telling a story, make sure that you're crafting that end. It needs to be epic.
That is so true, because that's the story you want them to take home.
Exactly. And it has to have an ending. Because if stories don't have endings, I feel let down. I watched a series last night with my husband. It was terrible. The end was like, what was that?
Yeah.
I was so excited throughout, but because the ending was so terrible, I've completely written off the series and I won't tell anyone to watch it.
Yeah.
The ending is what determines the entire experience for me.
And if you think about it, the relationship between the brand and the event and the attendee,
absolutely,
that event is the continuation of that relationship between the brand and the attendee.
Exactly.
Right? It brings the attendee together and the brand there and then, but it doesn't end there. We want the story to continue. And it will continue on many levels for the rest of the year. So I understand why it is so important then for that story to end well. And it's something we take for granted, I think.
Yeah, we put sponsors on the stage, the most boring ones, instead of doing something a little different, instead of something a little magical. And the thing is, the story ends there. But then there's also, the highlights reel. Or, your next event takes place same time next year. Launch that next year's event there at that event.
And true, so often you also hear, let's not put anything too hectic on at the end of the day because people will leave.
Oh, they're tired.
They're tired. They're going to be in a different frame of mind. They might need to leave early. We might get a different, smaller numbers. But if the expectation of something greater is there, you will get them there.
Exactly.
Right?
Someone doesn't get too tired to watch the end of the series. They binge watch it for that exact reason. They want to see how it ends.
Yes.
So if you're wanting to create addicts, I know it sounds a bit sneaky, but you are trying to create addicts. You want people to be so addicted to the experience, they want to see how it ends.
What's next?
What's next? Not, well, what was that?
Now, of course, the industry itself, right, is shifting. So that's exciting to see, and it'll start to come through. And with more people listening to this conversation, I'm hoping that we'll see it more in all kinds of events in South Africa. But let's talk about Africa itself, right? What trends in experiential design are you seeing emerge on the continent, but in the African context? Let's put it that way.
I think Africa is quite behind, to be honest. Going to international conferences, the international conferences are way ahead of us in terms of using emotion design, crafting experiences. Africa is definitely far behind. I think South Africa is ahead of the curve in terms of the rest of Africa. They are very famous for the logo, just plonking the logo, the program, having the sponsors on the stage, and that's the end of the event. Yeah. So if I'm honest, I think South Africa is leading in terms of experience design in Africa, in terms of the events I've been to, the ones we've been asked to help on, and just looking at a lot of the case studies, the things we take over. It really just is about the content. No one's really looking at the registration. In fact, clients will say to me, but that's just registration. Just have a table and some name badges. Whereas I think clients and organisers in South Africa are a lot more forward-thinking than the rest of Africa. So in terms of the trends here in South Africa, I think people are taking the touch points more seriously. I think people are thinking differently about how to curate the programs. I'm seeing a shift. The last 5 years of I've not been bored as much as I was the 5 years before that, or the 5 before that even. So I think people are starting to do things differently. I think our industry has, there's more industry events, which allows us to go and speak to other organisers, share our kind of wisdom, as we get older.
Yes.
I am getting older. Sharing with the younger generation how to do things differently. I see it with my team, the youngsters in my team, they thinking differently. They've got like this fresh energy. And I think it's gonna shift. I think where it's gonna be different is trying to get our clients to come on the journey with us.
Yes.
Because it's a budget conversation as well.
True.
And a lot of people will be like, oh, we don't have budget. But you can't actually afford not to spend the money on those things, because then you may as well not have an event.
And I think sometimes budget is not a good enough excuse.
No.
Because the story still needs to be told, right? And you can work within the budget and still tell the story.
Absolutely.
Having little budget doesn't stop you, right? I mean, I'm sure you have events of different sizes and different means, that you have resources that you have to work with, and it still happens. But the story, the narrative still starts when you launch that program.
Absolutely.
Until the end.
Yeah, we have some shoestring budgets, and especially with associations, because they're so kind of strapped in terms of resources from a time perspective and money, because they don't have full-time staff.
Yep.
It's very rare you find an association that has full-time staffing. So they don't have time, and they think they have to do everything, and you tell them that's why you have a conference organizer, because we're supposed to do those things for you. But second, the budget excuse is generally the one we get. Like, we can't do that at registration, we don't have budget. But we've had to get very creative with how we do things and try to show them you cannot cut those things, because then please rather cancel your conference, because the brand damage you're going to do is so much greater than just not having that event. Rather don't have it and save up another year and have a proper event the following year, because then you're going to get people who come back. But there's nothing worse than having an event that's poor, that's been designed in a way that makes people run like hell and stimulate your fight or flight response. They're not going to come back. They're going to share that bad news with their friends, because nothing spreads like bad news. And they're not going to come back the following year. So rather not. Do it properly. If you've got a really crafty conference organizer, they can work it on a shoestring. We've done some really weird things for a very low budget, and it's worked. They said, or MCs, the biggest thing they do is they put someone on the stage. The MC story is always a funny thing for me. They'll put someone on the stage that has no idea what they're doing, but that is your main storyteller. And they don't want to spend money on an MC. But what we've done before is a client said, we don't have the budget for an MC, and I said, fine, but then I'm going to coach the staff member that wants to go onto the stage. We're going to write the script, they're going to practice, and we're going to make sure that when they get on that stage, they're telling the story in a way that a professional MC would. And then you make it part of the magic of it. Like, this is a staff member. So you tell the story about the staff member so people actually feel a little bit more forgiving.
Yes.
But again, you've got to be authentic about it. Don't just put a staff member on the stage and be like, meet your MC. No, that doesn't work.
This is not a professional MC.
No, exactly.
But, sometimes that actually works better off, because sometimes you can get a professional MC and it's disastrous because they aren't able to carry the narrative, because they don't familiarize themselves sufficiently with the story as well.
Yeah, and that's naughty. I think the thing we sometimes forget to do, and some organizers do this, they don't brief the MC on the actual story behind the event. So they go there just doing their, dance on the stage, and they forget, or they haven't been briefed on the story underneath it.
Exactly.
And that's a fail on our side, as organizers, because they're part of the story. They're carrying the whole story.
Yes.
They almost have to select them 6 months before your event.
Agreed.
So that they can be part of some of the briefing. So they can be part of the briefing meetings, some of them leading up. They know the client's personality. So they feel like they can be kind of part of it. They need to feel like it's congruent, that it's been chosen, and it was chosen that way. It can't just be this random person you've plunked on the stage and now told them they have to just perform.
Yeah. And again, it's one of those things, like we talked about registration earlier, it's one of those things that get overlooked as well, left to the end. And we often talk about, and you talked about now briefing suppliers, briefing the MC. But it's not just the MC, it's your suppliers as a whole, about the brief that you give them, because they are helping you tell the story.
Yeah.
The different service providers. So whether it's the menu that you're curating for that to tell the story, right? The signage that you're building to tell the story. When your suppliers understand the why, am I right? They're able to help you fulfill this story, this narrative that you want to these attendees to walk away with that. What is that feeling, right? So, but we so often we will say we need, say we're going lounge seating, right? Style. We need 8 pods of lounge seating, right? And that's it. Please deliver. No more than that. And that's a fail.
That's a fail. It's a fail because we haven't told the supplier what we're trying to achieve. And I think this is why I love working with venues like Century City, conference center, because it is around, first, they're a sustainable venue. So we always take our sustainability conferences there. But the chef there, if you say to him, this is what I'm trying to do, he'll craft the venue, he'll craft the menu, he'll even design the dish and how kind of the elements or the dish is designed. He'll write words on the
so the whole presentation.
The whole presentation comes together, and not every venue is like that.
Yeah.
The other thing that people don't think about is choosing a venue based on relevancy rather than expediency. I'll give you an example.
Right.
When the International AIDS Conference came to South Africa for the first time in 2000, it made sense that conference would come to Africa because if you think about the burden of disease in Africa, it's highest. So taking it to a first world country doesn't actually make sense. It can happen there because the scientists are there. When you bring it to South Africa and Africa, you've created this magical moment because you've now chosen a venue, a destination based on relevancy rather than expediency. And then what happens is you start to see a shift. 2000 was an amazing time where the price of antiretrovirals was sky high. Bringing that conference then to South Africa, they created fans. After that conference came to South Africa, the highest kind of grouping of geographical kind of fans following that conference became South African after the US, obviously, if it wasn't hosted in the US. But this is the thing for me. I think, we haven't talked about this at all, but how you choose your venue and even just the destination of where you are going to be having your event needs to make sense in terms of what you're talking about.
Yes.
As well.
And again, like you're saying, so we take those things for granted. So, and I think it goes back to you saying, sitting with a client, understanding the reason behind why we're doing the event, what are the outcomes, what do we want people to walk away with, and then looking at our ecosystem to make sure we're choosing the right venues to complement that event,
and tell
the
the
right
story.
suppliers, the right food. It all helps us to support the story.
Absolutely.
Right. Now, you've worn many hats and many leadership hats. I can see that, working in the different associations and across your journey. So let's go there for a little bit, right? As someone balancing creativity, strategy, business leadership, this journey has probably taught you so much about leading creative teams. So give us some insights there.
I think being a creative myself, and it's weird. I talked earlier about going to study psychology, just trying to understand myself. I think, being a young creative, wanting to achieve so much, struggling with imposter syndrome, and that never goes away. I think, you've got to kind of just ask yourself, what is it that I want to achieve in my life? But being a creative and leading other creatives, it's hard because I know what this thing needs to look like. Having ADHD, being an ADHD entrepreneur, and I sit on the board of EO. I sit, on many different organizational boards, and I realized my ADHD is my superpower. So I think when you talk about leading teams, I find people who can handle me and my ADHD. I find clients who can handle me and my ADHD and who kind of embrace it. But it's been rough. I think as leaders, as women, as mothers, there's so many different hats that you have to wear. I've struggled with it all. Imposter syndrome, ADHD, mom guilt. They don't tell you about that when you're pregnant. And I think just being gentle with yourself and understanding that everybody's going through their own stuff. Everyone has their own stuff. Everyone's on their own journey. So I think, how do I lead those teams? With grace, being able to say sorry when you're sorry and when you mess up, and realizing that you're not always the smartest person in the room. And if you are, you're in the wrong room. So I think that's really how I work with teams.
That is very powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love that. I love that. Now, as we close this conversation, I wish it could go on forever, but I think we might come back for more. what is the one principle, either psychological or experiential, that every organizer should adopt if they want to design events that truly change how people think, feel, and connect?
Being authentic. I think authenticity is a big thing for me. It's how I choose to live my life. It's how I ask my clients to run their events. If something doesn't feel authentic, don't do it. And I think that speaks to this conversation and why I agreed to come and chat to you. It's because I value authentic humans and I value authentic conversations. And I think as organizers, we need to make sure that we're putting the most authentic people on the stage and we're telling a story for people, because if you don't value authenticity, what you're doing is you're helping to breed imposter syndrome, because people in themselves think, well, if I can't do it perfectly, I don't belong. But if you're showing everybody that it doesn't mean you don't have to be perfect to be on the stage. You don't have to be perfect to be a professor. You don't have to be perfect. You're teaching everyone that it's okay to be me. And I think that's a story I try and tell every single day, and that's how I choose to curate conferences.
Authentic. I like that. Be real. Be yourself.
Because everyone can see a fake a mile away.
Yeah.
But what you're doing is you're helping people hide.
Yeah.
You know, I talk about congruence and, your shadow. And I think when people are not congruent, it makes you sick. So the more authentic experiences that you are subjected to, the more you start to realize to yourself that I can be authentic, I can be myself, and you can be congruent. Is when when what you're saying to people and who you are is congruent with who you are on the inside. And you're embracing that shadow and you're just being real. I think the more real conversations we can have on stages, in boardrooms, in quiet one-on-one conversations, I think the better the world will be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, what I take away from this conversation, I think it's simple and it's so powerful, but it's definitely a reminder that events are not logistics. It's not just all about the logistics. It's about the human experience. It's about being authentic and real. And when we design with the psychology and purpose and meaning at the center, I think we don't just create better events, but we're creating moments that actually change people. So Tamlynne, I can't say thank you enough for such an amazing conversation. It's so genuine. It's been so meaningful. I take away so much from it for my own events, and I'm sure our audience will as well. And if anybody wanted to reach out to you, how can they contact you?
Tamlynne at idna.co.za or our website, www.idna.co.za.
And on LinkedIn too, I'm sure?
Absolutely, I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Well, if this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone else in your network who designs events, leads associations, or cares about the quality of our human gatherings. And remember to subscribe to Africa Event Connect on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And you can also follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram for more conversations shaping the future of our industry. From me, Projeni Pather, thank you so much for tuning in.